Welcome into this edition of the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I'm Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on the show. It's Thursday when we're recording, which means it's our game preview and our game picks for this weekend's football game between the Oregon Ducks, who are number 9 in the country, the Washington State Cougars, who are unranked, but as of 2 weeks ago, were a top 13 team. I guess maybe the story of this game is, who is Washington State going to be in this one? The team that's the first 4 weeks where they look like Jamie Vinnick on our podcast yesterday said maybe a dark horse candidate to get to Vegas, or the last 2 weeks where they've simply just been, to steal a phrase from Deion Sanders, hot garbage. Like their offense had one touchdown in the last 2 games. Cameron Ward has turned the football over. And last week at home against an improved Arizona team, but still, this is an Arizona team, allowed 44 points to a backup quarterback who looks really good and maybe is going to be their starting quarterback moving forward. But nonetheless, 44 points at home. This is a weird one. Ducks are favored by almost 3 scores. Oregon's coming off a loss, but this is also a team in Washington State that has played Oregon tough for a long stretch of years. They're 4-4, I think, in the last 8. Oregon's 6-4 in the last 10. The Ducks have won 4 in a row. But guys, last year, it took a Herculean effort to come back and win.
Yeah, no. I'm very curious to see where Washington State's at. We've talked about it a little bit already this week with Jamie. He kind of provided some of the background in terms of the up and down play, and it's actually 2 touchdowns. Matt, I looked into it. They went for 2 on their first score last game and were stopped, so it wasn't a 2 field goal. So 2 touchdowns in 2 weeks, which is still not up to standard considering that was an offense that was averaging in the 40s going into that stretch. So it'll be interesting to see what Oregon presents, I guess, on the field against a Washington State team that right now is kind of reeling, and Oregon wants this game really badly too, in terms of picking up some momentum after a tough loss. Oregon's played very, very well pretty much every game this season. We've talked about it earlier on the show. I expect they'll play really well again. What does Washington State have? And I think in terms of when we get to the end of the show with the predictions, that's kind of the element here. I'm expecting a really strong performance from Oregon. What do we see from Washington State? And if Washington State is not able to play at its best again, how quickly does Oregon separate? How much does Oregon separate? And can they win by a much larger margin than they have recently in this rivalry?
The Arizona loss was very strange. I think I talked about it on Tuesday for that podcast, and that, I like Arizona. I've been on this podcast for at least the last 2 years now, leading one of the Jedfish hype trains that there is. I like their team. I think they're pretty good, but to lose 44-6 at home, it's not great. And I'll bring up the same point I made on Tuesday as well. This is an opportunity for Oregon to just kind of end the season for Washington State, more or less. This is a Washington State team who, again, gets destroyed at home by Arizona 44-6 and then has to go on the road to go play Oregon. Not exactly inspiring information that you would be learning if you were on the Washington State football team. So, and Oregon is coming off a dramatic loss. It was a great game. The polls still love Oregon. The advanced analytics still love Oregon. This is still a very good football team. That's why they're only ninth in the country. It's another opportunity on national television, nonetheless, to go out and have a good day at the office and put up 50 points. And I kind of expect that's what Oregon is going to do this game. I think Washington State is really struggling on offense. I know that their offensive line is not great. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for guys on the edge, specifically Jordan Birch and Brandon Dorlus, to get some opportunities to get to Cam Ward. They had 1 million pressures last year against Cam Ward. Despite them barely winning, there's still an opportunity to go about and get some defensive stops here. So I am interested to see what Washington State looks like. They do get Josh Kelly back, who's going to help on the offense. He's going to be another week that's healthy. He played last weekend against Arizona, but We'll see. I just this is an opportunity for Oregon, and I'm not entirely sure Washington State is going to be up to the task at hand. And I'm not saying they're going to quit or anything like that, but it's kind of a reeling program.
I don't know if this is like a fork in the road type game for Oregon, but they can make a pretty big statement here with
Right.
what Jared's talking about. Like if they can come out and the game's over essentially by halftime, and they keep pouring it on, whether it's the first string group or the second or third string group in the second half. At some point when they get in, like they walk out of this with a 45-17 victory. Like that's a pretty big statement, I think, from this Oregon team, from their mindset, from their talent level. Like this Cougar team's going to be they're not bad, but Oregon is better. And if they show that, I don't know, this could be a game where we walk away going, wow, like this team's pretty good to bounce back from an emotional loss like that, to play a team that's historically given them fits and they just steamrolled them. Like it says a lot about maybe the coaching, says a lot about the leadership on the team, the players, the talent, which I guess it's just natural segue. Like this week, it's been noticeably different, even in the few moments each day that we're at practice. It's been different from a intensity standpoint. I remember walking off Wednesday and Eric was near me and I mentioned him like, that was different. Like literally guys getting tackled to the ground, full on tackles happening, which I don't think the coaches were wanting. But like you could tell this team's pissed off, and it's been reflected in how they've practiced. To the comment Dan made Monday night, which the 5% faster comment to the team wanting to put pads on Monday when they didn't have to. Like this team's on a mission right now. It feels like.
Yeah, I mean, Dan even said on Tuesday they were a little too amped up. They had to kind of cool everybody off a little, which is. I think you like to hear things like that in terms of where everybody's mindset is. And we have a story up on duckterritory.com from Tuesday with interviews with several of the players talking about kind of what the last couple of days had been. Marcus, I think I can't remember if we summarized all of this, but we did a little bit of summary on this previously of just the approach that they brought this week, coming off a loss that obviously didn't sit well, and it shouldn't sit well, right? If you're a competitor and you lose a game like that in that situation, you're not going to feel very good. And you could sense, even talking to some of the players this week, there was a certain level of agitation. It hadn't. I mean, Dorless even said they hadn't moved on from it. And you could watch Trico's Bridges interview, and you got a sense that like there were still moments in that game that he hasn't fully moved on from, as you'd expect, because it was a game where it was a player or two here, a player or two there. That was the difference. And so if you're a competitor and you point out those, you go through those plays, you go, man, if this would have been, if I just could have turned my head a little bit quicker, if I could have just done this or that, you understand the human element of it. Like, yeah, of course that still weighs on them. So yeah, I think you saw that at practice this week. And I think that's part of why I'm so confident Oregon's going to play well, in part just because Oregon's played really, really well every game at home this season. And honestly, with the exception of a slow start at Stanford, and I even say at Texas Tech they played pretty well. They just was pretty sloppy. And then in this last game against Washington, I thought they played pretty well. So like I like you look at the schedule to this point, like there's not really any reason to think they're going to come out and lay an egg, because we haven't seen that, period. And with everything we've heard from what's going on behind the scenes, I think my confidence is even greater in terms of what we should see on Saturday.
Again, I think I talked about this on Tuesday as well. Like it's encouraging to hear, Dan originally talk about the 5% or 6%, whatever he said, better GPS numbers. It's encouraging to hear that they had to tell the guys to chill out for a second on Tuesday and Wednesday. You don't often hear that from football coaches telling the guys to chill out. That just means that they were really passionate, really intense on those Tuesday, Wednesday practices. What that entails, again, we're not 100% sure. We just got to watch the 15 minutes or so before practice, or at the beginning of practice, which there wasn't too much of a difference going on there. It seemed a little bit more intense, but again, they're simple drills like mod bracket and the Mamba drill where it's one-on-one. So it's kind of hard to gain a real perspective of how more intense practice like that is. But reading between the lines, it seems like the rest of the practices on Tuesday and Wednesday were intense. They probably had to, you know, I mean, Dan literally said they had to get some guys and kind of separate it, that they were too intense. They were playing with too much passing. So I think that's a positive thing heading into this game. This is what you need to come back from a loss like that and have an opportunity and go seize that opportunity, like we were saying earlier at this game against Washington State. If a team didn't come out this week and practice with intensity, it honestly wouldn't be surprising, but not this Oregon team. Like, that's not what they were going to do. And with Dan in charge, that's never really how Oregon has been. They've gotten up for every game. I don't really think there's been moments where they've like played down to competition. I think we talked about this again on Tuesday. It's like when the worst start that they've had in a game was against Washington State last year, which was their second quote unquote true road game when they went to Atlanta against Georgia. I'm going to call that a road game because it was a road game. But that was their second road game under Dan Lanning. And so that was their worst start. And since then, they've come out firing basically every game. Stanford was a slow start, like Eric said, but they got back on top of it. So, and at home, I don't remember there being a slow start at home. They come out and they take the juice and they run with it. So we'll get to our predictions later, but I don't think this is going to be close. And it's because of some of those reasons of taking the intensity and the frustrations honestly out on Washington State, and then hopefully, taking some of them and then going to Utah the week later.
I think maybe the last slow start they've had, which was at home, probably Utah, and some of that, or most of that, was because of Bo Nix's injury. They were so limited what they could do. And then before that, probably the Washington game. Because if you remember, like, that game was back and forth. They scored a bunch, but the first half, it was like 14-7 or something like that. Like, it was not what we expected, and it didn't reflect what the actual score was like.
They messed up on the goal line a couple of times, and that's what did them in. I still feel like they did well. They moved the ball offensively, but they just didn't score. But to your point, it's like 2-3 times maybe in the last 2 years at home, and really it's like
this year,
kind of maybe it's a slow start.
This year though, that's why I feel really confident, right? We haven't seen a start like that at home at all, and even the games on the road, like as I said, the Stanford game wasn't ideal just because you didn't score in the first quarter, but they didn't start terribly against Texas Tech or Washington. I mean, like those weren't atrocious starts. They're scoring on their second drives both time, I think. So,
right.
Oh, we caught Matt right there in a water drink. Bad timing.
Yeah, tough. Sorry. As you can tell, my voice is gone, so a little extra water this morning. All right, let's go into some things that we're watching for. I'll start us off here. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you guys have looked at PFF and just Washington State's stuff. Their tackles, good God, they have graded absolutely atrociously in this game.
It's not great.
Really bad. I'm not going to try and pronounce the first name here, but Fa'amoe, one of their I think their right tackle, is their best, and he just grades at 56.8 pass block grade, and then their left tackle Esepole at 31.9.
Yeah.
Probably why Cameron Ward takes 13 steps back before he throws the football. To quote Brandon Dorlus, this right here could be the game. If Birch, Dorlus, Mateo, Tuioti, Purchase, Funa, Winston, like if that group off the edge, I don't want to say that they should dominate, but it's almost kind of like if you guys are as good as we think you are and as good as the stats have shown you to be through the first 6 games of the season, you probably should dominate this game. Like, these guys are not good at protecting the quarterback. And I wonder how many times I was expecting to go look at the sack numbers after I saw this and think Washington State's near the bottom. They're not. They're like 66th in the country. And that's probably because Cameron Ward is so good at escaping pressure and getting away from it, making up for the lack of protection. But this almost to me, this is the game. If these guys can fend off Oregon's pressure long enough to allow Ward time to either improvise or get the playoff, Washington State's offense could have some success and could keep them in this game. But if they can't, if they can't do their jobs and Oregon can take advantage of this mismatch, this game will get over very, very quickly, as Jared maybe said that this could go that way.
Could it be Colorado 2.0, right? Where Oregon just overpowers them up front? I'm not saying it's going to be 42-0 in the fourth quarter, but like, could that be what happens?
Similar outcome.
That kind of thing where Colorado just can't hold up and Oregon's onslaught of pressure gets there and Ward. I mean, to me, kind of a slight attachment to this would be like if Oregon's corners can, because a lot of what Ward does is the ball comes out really fast, and that counters some of that pressure. That Matt brought up the other point about why it's so hard to bring down Ward, which is he's just really, really good in space. That's why players all week have been talking about that from a defensive side. But like, it might just be as simple as, can Oregon's corners stay with Washington State for 3 seconds on these plays, not give him anywhere to go with the ball, and then that forces it just to be a scramble drill from there. And then can you win kind of playing backyard football? Like, that's kind of what I'm looking at. But I think that's a great place to start. And I kind of building right off of that is to me, like, is Washington State even going to try to run the football? Like, have you looked at what they've done so far in conference play? It's pretty abysmal. 22 carries, 35 yards against Arizona, 19 carries, 12 yards against UCLA, 30 for 106 against Oregon State. Like, they just aren't able to run the football. And they're trying, as Jamie said earlier this week, like, they're still averaging like 25 rush attempts per game. Some of those probably do include sacks, but like, they're making an effort to do it. They're just having no success. It's 2 consecutive weeks where they've been held beneath like 40 yards rushing, So if Oregon's defense, which is probably about as good of a rush defense as there is in this conference, UCLA, I think statistically is better. Utah has been, I think their numbers are skewed a little bit. I think they're still right at the top though. Like, that can also be a component. Like, if it comes down to being like, hey, Cam, you're going to face 3rd and 7 every down, and our tackles can't protect you from those guys, and your receivers can't get open because Oregon is shutting their guys down. Good luck. Like, that's just not a winning proposition for Cam Ward. He has asked to do way too much. So, if Washington State can run the ball a little bit more effectively, kind of like what we saw from Washington, which was a surprise, especially in that first half where they were really running off tackle with success, maybe that buys Ward some time. Maybe Oregon has to change what it's doing defensively again to counter, kind of like what they did against Washington. So that's sort of me as the chess match there when Oregon's on defense is kind of how quickly can you force Ward to get it out, and can you stop him from having anywhere to go with the ball? And it becomes kind of the Shedeur Sanders thing once again, where he's running around, but he doesn't really have anywhere to go with the football.
This is what I was going to point out as well. This offensive line catastrophe that is Washington State's. It's bad. UCLA, who again is one of the best pass rushers in the Pac-12, and Latu, is that how we say it? I feel like I've heard this before. I don't know. I'm bad with the Polynesian pronunciations.
I like Latu is correct. I can't remember if the first name.
It's the 4-letter word is correct. Good, go me. I'm proud of myself.
The other one is either Leatu or Liatu. I don't know, but yeah. Latu.
Anyways,
Latu,
quite good. 1st-round pick, almost guaranteed at this point. He had 10 pressures by himself against Washington State. The team as a whole had 35. Oregon, what was the number, Eric? How many did they have last year against Washington State? 37?
Exactly.
37. This Oregon defense is much better than it was last year.
Yeah.
They know the scheme. They have guys who fit the scheme. They have player personnel, finally. They have dudes who can rush the passer on their own. They have Jordan Birch, who's winning 21% of his matchups this year and is getting a little bit of draft buzz this year. I think that this could be the game. And I'm, again, like you guys are saying, the Colorado and Oregon idea where they just can't protect the quarterback. Yeah, Cam Ward's going to have a long day at the office. They are going to get to him a lot. And it all depends on if they can take him down, which Brandon Doyle has talked about a lot. during his interview on Tuesday, just like, look, he's annoying. He's hard to bring down. He's just a tough SOB out there. And that was last year. I have a feeling that Oregon, as a significantly better tackling team than they were last season, are going to have maybe as many equal or more opportunities to bring Cam Ward down. And I think they're going to get to him more often than not and bring him down more often than not. The thing about the Colorado game that I thought was really impressive was almost every sack opportunity that Oregon had, there were 2 or 3 guys there. It was like if
Yeah.
Shedeur Sanders missed the first dude, second guy was right there. And like I think specifically about Tatum Tuiyoti's first sack. Blake Purchase comes around the edge and forces him out. And Shedeur makes a good move to get around Purchase and then gets drilled by Tatum Tuioti right there. And I think that this Oregon defensive line is going to have a chance to do that again, where they're going to bring multiple guys off the edge. For how often Washington State passes, I'd expect to see the snap counts of Tuioti, of Purchase, of Mateo, of Birch, just their absolute true edge rushers, not necessarily Mace Funa, who's a much better defender against the run off the edge. I would expect the edge rushers in the passing situations to do much better. Like Washington State, I had the number up just a second ago. I think it was like 25 or 28% of their true pass sets they're still allowing pressures, which is very bad for those who are unaware. Like that is absolutely not what you want to do. And Oregon's going to have the personnel to do it. So, Matt, I'm glad you started this conversation about the offensive line, because I think that's the major turning point in this game potentially. I just think that Oregon's going to be able to get to the quarterback and have a situation like Shedeur Sanders where there could be mistakes made. And under pressure quarterbacks are always more likely to give up the football, whether it be a fumble, whether it be an interception. I just think that Oregon's defensive line is going to get home, and then life for the secondary is going to be much easier, just like it has been more or less all season.
Are we at all like concerned offensively for Oregon? Like, is this simply just a game where, hey, do your job defensively and you walk away because they're so good offensively? Like Oregon is just it's almost automatic, especially at home. To what Jared's point earlier in the show, just I kind of don't have any like offensive concerns for Oregon in this game.
Averaging 52 points per game at home. Every single one of the games they've had has been off to like an incredible start. I think I had the splits at one point. It was like their first game against Portland State. I think every single Bo Nix led drive was a touchdown. There was like 8 or 9. Against Hawaii, I think it was 5 of 7 drives to start the game were touchdowns. Against Colorado, I think it was 6 of 7 were touchdowns. So no, I'm not concerned. I did have 2 matchups in particular I wanted to highlight. I'll start with the one that we were just kind of relates to what we were just talking about. The inverse of the pressure stuff. Josh Connerly last week against Washington, we talked about the PFF grade. We didn't mention he was credited with 6 pressures allowed by Washington. No sacks, 1 hit. So he was not at his best. And this week, it's not an easier matchup by any means with Ron Stone Jr., or Brennan Jackson. Both those guys can kind of come off the edge, but Stone Jr. is typically attacking left tackles, at least from what I've seen this year. That'll be a matchup to watch. Kind of another interesting one where Connerly is a first-year starter. Stone's a 6th-year player who started the last 4 years at Washington State. So it's a really experienced veteran, explosive pass rusher against a really, really athletic, young, talented left tackle, but one who's kind of, I don't want to say he's been the weak link, because I think Oregon's offensive line has played really, really well. But if you were to point to somebody, it would be that left side. Like Jackson Powers Johnson, for a reason, was an AP midseason All-American. I think Stephen Jones has quietly been pretty darn good. And Johnny Cornelius we probably haven't talked enough about how good he's been, even though last game wasn't, according to PFF, at least his best. So I would highlight that. And then the other one, not that I have huge concerns, but Shaw Smith-Wade's, I think, the best corner Troy Franklin has faced all year. PFF's number 4 ranked corner in the conference. Big, rangy guy. Even a year ago, not that he like won a bunch of reps, but like he was a player that you will remember in terms of how much he played and his value for them. No one's going to take Troy Franklin off the board. Like that's just not happening. But Troy, like, let's say Troy has a game where he only has 4 catches for 75 yards. I'm not saying I'm not even creating a scenario where I think they're losing, because we'll get to score predictions in a moment. But I'm just kind of laying it out here. Like, I would be curious to hear, like, what's Oregon's counterpunch through the air if Troy is kind of, for his standards at least, bottled up, and maybe they can only get him the ball 3 or 4 times for 50, 60, 70 yards as opposed to 8 times for 140. Like, who becomes the next target? Where do they go? Where does Bo kind of lock in next? What kind of supplementary receivers step up would be my question there. So that's not a concern as much as it is like a curiosity to see, like, okay,
Right.
like if Smith Wade actually can kind of slow some of the Troy Franklin production, like where do they turn next?
They turn to the ground because that's where
Yes.
Oregon has a big advantage here. Washington State's interior front just isn't great. I think that teams can easily run through them. I think we talked about this on Tuesday as well as an opportunity for Oregon to go in there and kind of push some people around. Against Oregon State, Washington State's defense allowed 242 yards on the ground, 6.2 yards per carry, 181 to UCLA, 3.4. So did a little bit better there, but then went back to Arizona, who really doesn't have a great offensive line, and they averaged 4.7 yards on 37 carries for 174 yards. This is an opportunity for Oregon if let's say Troy Franklin does have a bad day and is covered well, and Washington State keys him up and gets good coverage and doubles him and does all of these things, and Bo, kind of goes to Gary Bryan and Tez Johnson and Trayshawn Holden, but they're not really doing a lot. Shoot, man, they'll just jump in 13 personnel, maybe even some jumbo stuff, and just run the ball down their throat, because I think that's going to happen. I think there's going to be moments where Oregon's going to like maybe have 4 minutes left in the half and get the ball out of the second half and just say, all right, well, we're going to end this half with a touchdown, and we're going to do it by running the ball. And I think that's going to happen at least once this game, where they just say, all right, whatever, 13 personnel, either block it or don't. Like, good luck. And so I think that's immediately where they turn to. Tez Johnson had a really good day at the office against Washington. He had like 7 or 8 receptions for nearly 100 yards. No touchdown, unfortunately for me, but good day. Gary Bryant missed most of the second half, most of the first half after taking a shot on a kickoff return. So his snaps were way down. That takes a more explosive player out of the offense and inserts Trayshawn Holden, who is not very explosive of a player, but still a good one at that, who is more of a red zone threat than a middle of the field threat.
Yep.
So I think Gary could be an option here, especially if they put a lot of attention on Troy, because Gary has been productive. He's been a good receiver during his time at Oregon here. So I think that there are other options, but not 1B other than 1A Troy is clearly running the ball and just making this a 21-0 game because they're using 1 trillion seconds off the clock.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into our bold predictions, which we will say they're bold.
Uh-oh.
And then end it with our game picks. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles podcast. I teased it there, bold picks, because, fellas, it was a rough week for us last week. These are supposed to be bold.
Did we get any?
Between the three of us, we did not get one correct.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
No.
Now, some of these are because maybe
they were too bold.
A little bit better than expected. Like Jared, for instance, said Washington would have the most yards Oregon's defense has allowed all season long. That did not happen because Oregon's defense played probably better than we anticipated. So some of these were
single me out. Why don't you? Not going to talk about anybody else's. Come on.
I'm praising. I'm giving you credit. Like yours is a good one. Ours were bad. Like the ones that we didn't hit. Like.
But I mean, I wasn't that far off, but yeah, I know they didn't hit at all. So
yeah, I mean, I was like 20 yards from Bo having his career, game in a top 10 matchup. Don't ask him, by the way, what his record is, because that'll piss him off. But yeah, not a good standing here. 0 for 4 for all of us, so the standings don't change there. Game predictions. Eric and I both get ties. I get a push because I predicted Oregon would win straight up, so I lost that one. But they pushed by the betting line of 3. Eric predicted a 3-point win, and that's what happened. So he gets a push on that one.
It sucks I don't get credit for when I nailed the score. I mean, not that I was, again, I don't know.
But you do get points for the straight up bet. Jared
I
did
did.
get the straight up bet as well. But Jared lost on the spread because he said 4, which sucks. And they won by 3. So all right.
Yep.
So nothing literally changes in any of the leaderboard stuff here. Offensive team will start here. Oregon's offense has been one of the best in the entire country. They ranked number 1 overall in yards per game, just over 553 yards. They're 4th in the country in yards per play at 7.74. In this game last year, Oregon hit 624. I don't think they're going to do that again on Saturday, but I'm going to predict a big day from the offense, and they hit 550 yards or more in this game. Believe it or not, they've only done that twice. Portland State, when they went for like 720, and then I believe the other one was the Colorado game. So they haven't gone over 550 a lot, even though they're averaging 553. It's just because of a 700-yard performance week 1 against Portland State. So give me 550 or more yards for Oregon's offense.
Oregon's offense, by the way, number 1 nationally in scoring offense and total offense, coming off a loss to Washington. So a lot of that was USC just completely imploding against Notre Dame, but because they were ahead of Oregon in a couple of those. Last time Oregon scored 45 or more points in this series, do you guys know?
No.
10 years ago. It's been 10 years since they've done that, which is surprising. So, so I'm going to say they're going to score at least 45 points in this football game. I don't think that's sounds like the most bold-ish thing ever, but the fact that they haven't done it in 10 years against Washington State, and there's been some really good offensive teams mixed in, including last year's team. So I'll go 45 or more points here against the Cougars.
I've been kind of alluding to it all podcast, all 32 minutes of this, that I just kind of feel bad for Washington State that they have to play Oregon out of this tremendously emotional game that Oregon wants to put themselves back on the map. I think Oregon's going to put up over 600 yards offense. They're going to have the second highest of the year behind the Portland State, the 719 that Matt mentioned earlier. So I'm going to one-up Matt just a little bit. But regardless, I still think 624 may be in reach. I don't know. But I do kind of feel bad for Washington State that it's like, hey, you get to go play a top 10 team after getting absolutely shelled at home against a team that wants to prove the whole world that they're still way better than everybody else thinks. And good luck. Oh, and also you're on the road. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And you've been terrible on the road so far this year. So good luck.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, offensive player prediction of the game. This is a little bit of a bold one. I'm going to take Jordan James. I'm going to do a 2-player prop here, or maybe just a 1-player, but I'm going to involve 2. I think Jordan James will finish the day with more rushing yards than Bucky Irving.
I like that.
I don't really have a reason behind this. Just kind of sounded good in my head. Maybe it'll be such a blowout that Jordan James will get a significant portion of the carries, and then Bucky will just ride pine. But yeah, no, give me Jordan James more rushing yards than Bucky Irving.
I'm into that one. This is, I guess, slightly off topic. Do we think a third running back emerges and sees the field outside of garbage time, or it kind of feels like this is just a two-man gig the rest of the way?
Yeah,
seems like a 2-man scramble. Yeah,
that's what I said at the beginning. If they were good enough, it would have been a 4-man rotation, not a 3-man. They're just not there.
My individual, I've got, and this kind of surprised me a little bit. Maybe it shouldn't, but Bo hasn't had a 5-touchdown game this year. He had 4 a season ago. So I think he's gonna have a 5-touchdown game. He got pretty close against Stanford and Colorado at 4 in both of those. Part of that is he just hasn't been running the ball around the goal line, which was something he had 14 rushing touchdowns a year ago. And I think I looked it up. I think 10 or 11 of those were inside the 5-yard line, basically quarterback sneaks. I don't know if we'll get back to that on Saturday, in part because the run game isn't really broken in terms of just handing it off to one of those dynamic running backs around the goal line. But I think he's going to have a big day. I think he's going to be motivated, obviously, to show. I mean, he played really, really well in Seattle. I mean, it's really hard. There's not much to nitpick there. I think he's going to have another awesome game. I think we're going to come out of this next couple of stretch of games saying it's going to be hard for Bo to really unseat Penix unless he beats him in the conference championship game. But we're going to be talking about how he's really playing his best now, and he's giving himself a chance to at least be invited to New York City.
All right, my turn. I'm gonna do. We've done some of these, and they haven't played out. I've done Patrick Herbert. I think Eric has done Tez Johnson. I think I've even done Tez Johnson too. I have, and all three of them haven't happened. But I'm gonna do it again. This might be the last one. Gary Bryant last week didn't have a single catch. That was only the fourth time in his career here or at USC that he played in a game and didn't have a catch. 24 career games to his name. That won't happen this weekend. Again, it won't be number 5. So give me Gary Bryant for 3 catches, 45 yards, and a touchdown in this one. He hasn't done much since probably week 2 or 3. It feels like he had a 100-yard performance and I think 2 or 1 touchdown against Portland State, but he's kind of cooled off since the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season. I think that kind of jumps back up again for Oregon. Gary Bryant, 3 catches, 45 yards, and a touchdown.
That's pretty. I like that one, Matt, because it speaks to what we were talking about earlier with if Smith Wade for Washington State can slow some of the Troy Franklin stuff, somebody else has to be the recipient of that. And
right.
As Jared said, I think Gary's a pretty good pick.
All right. Team defense. Last season at Washington State, Oregon was able to get to Cameron Ward an impressive 5 times, considering how quick he gets the ball out. Cougars like to get the ball out quick, which makes it harder. I think the Ducks are going to be able in the backfield again. We talked about it front end of this podcast, which is how atrocious their tackles have been this season. I think Oregon takes advantage of that. And Dorless talked a lot about how last year he was trying to just kill Cameron Ward, hit him kill as in hit him really hard and just, give everything he had to, into the hit. Whereas now this season it's been communicated to him like, hey, it's important to get big hits. Yeah, but it's more important to wrap up and get the guy down. Make sure you don't miss. And I think that's going to translate onto the football field, not just for Brandon Dorless, but for the entire defense. And they're going to keep him pretty much in check. So I'm going to take a gamble here. 4 or more sacks for Oregon's defense in this game.
Those sort of sacks, those pressures, which we've talked about all game, or all show, I should say, can lead to turnovers. Washington State has been very turnover prone. Cameron Ward in particular has been of late. They've averaged 3 turnovers lost the last 3 games in conference play. Had 4 against UCLA, and in what was a 1-score game that they, that was the difference. I think this week similar stuff happens. I think Oregon forces 3 or more turnovers. They haven't had a lot of forced fumbles. Oregon hasn't really forced a ton of turnovers in general this year. Even the one against Penix last week was more of a Odunze just kind of slipped coming out of his route, or there was a miscommunication more than it was like an awesome defensive play. Not to take anything away from Jaleel because he still had to catch the ball, but I think this week they kind of get right. I think they're going to force 3 or more turnovers. Like I said, Washington State's not been great there, and Penix all the year hasn't thrown a ton of interceptions. I think he said 3 the last couple of weeks, but he's been kind of fumble prone. If you look kind of closely, I think he's had 4 or 5 all that he's lost this season. So I think that's an area where Oregon could potentially create separation just from turning the Cougars over.
Yeah, I had the same thing, 3 or more turnovers.
Share it. Let's just share it with me, Jared. Why don't we just take this one together? Huh?
No, that's fine. I'll do it. Yeah, no, Oregon hasn't done well in the turnover department ever since Tech. And I think Dan has talked a couple times like, turnovers, they come in bunches. Like, I think that's just more of like I an optimistic perspective that like they're coming. I promise they're coming, and then they're going to get a bunch of them. I predicted this turnover thing 2 or 3 times this year. Hasn't worked, unfortunately. But we're going to do it again. And I just think that the pressure, like I was kind of alluding at earlier as well, the pressure is going to get there. Birch, Dorless, all these fellas are going to have their opportunity to go get Cam Ward. And that could lead to a fumble, like Eric was talking about. That could lead to an interception. That could lead to a tip ball. That could, all these options that Oregon will hopefully have the chance of putting their hands on and getting to the football. So 3 or more turnovers. Doesn't matter how it happens, but we're gonna do it. We're gonna ride into this together, and yeah, we'll see how that goes. I don't know.
Shaking your hand, Jared. Shaking your
Um,
hand.
defensive individual prediction. I went through the last couple Washington State game logs, saw who their leading tacklers were for UCLA and Oregon State and Arizona. A lot of safeties, a lot of cornerbacks. No real surprise there. I thought about going with Steve Stevens because he's been at the top of some tackle charts the last couple of games, but I'm going to go Taisheem Johnson, and I'm going to say he has a rather good day. I'm going to say he gets over 9.5 tackles, which would probably mean he's leading the team. But I'm going to have Taisheem with 10 tackles this week. I just think it's a very similar idea to Washington and Texas Tech. There's just going to be a lot of opportunities. Taisheem's going to be around the ball a lot. The nice thing for Taisheem Johnson is that a lot of Washington State's receivers aren't as good as Washington's wide receivers. He's going to have more fair matchups and not have to go against dudes who are 6'2" and can jump out of the field, not the gym, and make catches anywhere. So I feel good about Taisheem's opportunities this game. So give me over 9.5 tackles.
I'm going to take the guy that Jared thought about taking, Steve, in part because I think it's important to kind of acknowledge that he's led the team in tackles 2 straight weeks. He's played, I think, probably his best football of his career the last couple of weeks.
Easily, yeah.
Mm-hmm. PFF now has him as Oregon's best defensive player over 130 snaps. Taki has the best PFF grade overall for an Oregon defensive player, but they rotate so much up front. I think Taki still played like close to 120. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. But Steve has certainly been impressive in the way he's played the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to say he's going to finish with 7 tackles or more, which is what he finished with last week. He had 8 against Stanford, which was tied a career high. So I think 3 straight games with 7 or more tackles for Steve. And I think he's going to lead the team in tackles again, too.
All right. Well, that was mine. I said 6, but you went 7. So let me adjust this real quick. I'm just going to go individual. Give me Evan Williams getting credit for 1.5 tackles for loss in this game. I think there's an opportunity that maybe he comes up on some spies with Cameron Ward or cleans up some tackle, he breaks containment from a doorless, pressure 13 yards behind the line of scrimmage and maybe doesn't get credited fully for a sack by himself, but cleans it up and prevents Cameron Ward from getting a big gain. And instead it's like a 1-yard loss or something of that nature. So Evan Williams with 1.5 tackles for loss in this game. So I had Steve Stevens as well. I think your point is correct. He is playing his best football, and it's pretty cool to see because last year he was just a guy, and now he's his snaps are down, although it hasn't been the case the last 2 weeks. They're actually going way up.
Yep.
But he's playing his best football. So, all right. Score predictions here. I actually don't have one written down.
Oh, Matt. Improvisation. What do you got?
Improvisation here. I've gone back and forth with a cover or not. I think Oregon gets out to a big lead, but I do wonder if Oregon pulls its second string, its starters and its second and third string guys get in, does the drop off impact the score here a little bit. 20.5, I think, is the margin right now from a sports perspective. But I'm going to do a cover. I think they cover. I think we get one of Oregon's better games of the season. They're at home, so that helps. I think this team's pretty fired up. I think we're going to get something similar to what we saw with Colorado. So give me Oregon 42, Washington State 17.
No earmuff warning this time. I don't need to curse.
Good.
Yeah. Save that for Jared if he wants to.
I'm here for it.
All right, cool. I'll let you be the one. No, I think Oregon wins pretty convincingly. I do have a score written down, Matt, so I will just roll with what I wrote, which was Oregon 45, Washington State 20. Like you, I'm kind of thinking there's going to be a little late Washington State offensive action here. I think Oregon might be up like 45-13, 45-10.
Yeah.
Washington State scores a couple late. I think we're coming out of this game going like, okay, corner turn by Oregon. They took care of business. They did what we wanted. We saw what we needed to see out of them coming off of that emotional loss to Washington. I think we're going to leave this game feeling like, okay, they've got some momentum now as they hit the road for what will be probably the most difficult environment the rest of the way. Not probably. I think the most difficult environment the rest of the way by a pretty good margin in Salt Lake. I think this will set you up to have some optimism going into that one. I think Oregon's going to be really, really motivated to make a statement. I think the offense will continue to do what it's been doing all year, home and away, but especially at home. And I think the defense we've kind of talked it out in terms of the blueprint for this. I think they're going to make Cam Ward have a really tough day. They're going to make it so basically it's unless Cam Ward is just making the most incredible individual plays over and over again, there's just not enough for Washington State to hang around. So I think it's going to be a decisive 45-20.
It's a good call. I got 45-21.
Ah!
I actually thought about going higher on Oregon for the same reasons that I've been talking about. My heart of hearts believes that Dan Lanning is going to get this team, and he knows how to motivate them. We all saw the Colorado clip, and that was the talk of the town for a week. But what that does is that motivates the team. That gets them on those hot starts. I don't know what Dan is going to say this time around. Maybe something like, these idiots are such a bad team that, the Pac-12 and the Big 12 don't even want them. I don't know. Whatever Dan wants to say, like, he's going to get the team motivated. And especially coming off the loss, like I talked about, like, I feel bad for Washington State. I do. And that's why I even thought about going higher than 45-21. But I think a lot of the game comes down to the trenches. When you win one side, that obviously helps. When you win both sides, the game should be yours. Washington last week won their side of the defensive trenches. I thought they got good pressure on Nix and made his life difficult. But also, at least on pass rushes, but Oregon's offensive line also did really good on rundowns. So there was a very even matched team there going against each other, which is why the score was so close. I don't think it's going to be the same way this time around. I think Oregon's defensive line is going to have a huge advantage, and I think Oregon's offensive line is going to have somewhat of an advantage. I think Bob Stone, who's my age, is going to be fine, and he's going to provide a big difficulty to Connerly or Cornelius, whatever side of the line he lines up on. And then Jackson as well is a good defender in his own right. I think he leads the team actually in sacks. It's just not going to be enough. And I think Oregon's going to be able to run the ball. I think they're going to be able to throw the ball. I think they're going to be able to just run theoretically and literally all over Washington State. So maybe 45-21. Would not be surprised if the Ducks' final score ended in a 5 either. But just for posterity's sake, I'll keep it 45.
I was just gonna say that. Like I gave my score. I'm not gonna change it, but like I kind of regret not going higher. I think there's a real chance that they hit 50, and it's gonna be a bloodbath. I think this is gonna be pretty bad. We're pretty impressive.
Football is one of the very few sports, professionally or not professionally, where you get an emotional loss and then the next week is just an absolute butt kicking. because there's only so many games. It's not like, maybe for postseason baseball or something like that, but there's not as many games where a team's like, all right, well, we only got one more shot at this, so we got to put it all to the wall here. This is what Oregon has now. They have to go all to the wall, and I think that's going to happen beginning this Saturday against Wazoo.
All right, it's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. Next time you hear from us, we'll be back in these seats Saturday evening, recapping Oregon, Washington State. 12:30 kickoff on ABC. Hope you guys enjoy the game. Until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.